Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Heroes Mindset Podcast. Today, I have on Cady North with me, the author of The Resiliency Effect. How are you doing, Cady?
I'm good, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, actually, when I like to start up my podcast, I like to start them up by asking you your personal story and how you got started. Actually, in your book, you detail a lot about, how you got started with ACEs and what you could describe and just essentially your entire career journey. And I'd love for me and everyone else to hear your story.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I, long time ago, an undergrad, actually majored in government, and I actually had to work my way through school. One of the things I had to do was support myself from every dollar for every dollar basically of tuition. So I was working full time in my undergrad, and I wasn't working at the school library or a restaurant or something like that. I actually was working for the former Speaker of the House in the Texas legislature. And so I got an early look at what it meant to have a lobbying firm, be a consultant, do sort of government work in a kind of, career public servant sort of a kind of an experience while I was doing my undergraduate education. And I think that was really helpful to have as an experience because I got to see not just how email communication should work, when I'm 18, 19, 20 years old, right? But how some of these more nebulous jobs or strange jobs in the government profession can work. One of the things that I was working on, for instance, was affordable housing projects. Believe it or not, affordable housing projects need lobbyists to help them get passed and to make sure that they get the right tax credits that they're supposed to get. And so, some of the projects I was working on was interviewing some of these people to make sure that the best information about their projects were being publicized correctly. And I learned early on that government work is a lot like PR work. It's just the people that you're trying to discuss and communicate with are members of Congress and their staff, or members of the legislature and their staff. So that set me up pretty well, actually, to, as soon as I was graduated, to land a pretty good job working for the Texas Department of Transportation, which eventually put me in Washington, D.C. as a liaison for the state government on issues related to transportation, finance, the budget, all those sorts of things. So pretty early in my career, I was doing a lot of what I would say big things, like not necessarily entry-level type work. And when I came to Washington, D.C. in 2007, I thought it was going to be a very temporary thing. Like I was going to go on my assignment, I was going to do my thing, and then I would get back to Texas at some point. But what I discovered, because in my book, the opening chapter is really about why I left for DC, which was less about the career and more about personal stuff that was going on in my life at the time, is that I actually really enjoyed DC, and I enjoyed the growth and the independence that I had, leaving behind so many of the things that I had experienced as a child and a young adult in my home. And so I decided to stay in DC, and I ended up, kind of hopping around to a few different positions. I worked in public policy for a national trade association called Financial Executives International, working on all kinds of different legislative policy. And it was right at the time when the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 was unfolding. And also Congress's response to that crisis was also being created and unfolding. And so I was working with Fortune 500 CEOs and CFOs on kind of the public policy discussion around how Congress should respond to the financial crisis.
So it's interesting. So you were living in Texas, right? And we don't have to get too into it, but I mean, you had some traumatic experiences growing up and also leaving Texas. You just decided, as a young adult, to just volunteer and say, hey, listen, I want to go from Texas to Washington, D.C. Like I just want to start over. I just kind of want to explore, right? Really explore yourself and explore outside of your known territory of Texas. What was it inside of you that I bet most people really didn't want to leave, right? Most people love staying within comfort, staying in their own home. What was it
Mhm.
that gave you that drive to really just be like, you know what, I want to explore?
Well, I mean, I call it doing a geographical, right? It's sort of like if you can just pick up and stop everything, it's almost
Yeah,
like, in a sense, you're running from whatever you would experience. And that was the case for me. But also, it is an opportunity to kind of start fresh.
yeah,
And the hope is that you won't experience things that you experienced prior in the new place once you
yeah,
do a geographical. And I don't know if that's something that runs in my family or not, but like my mother and father didn't live in the place where they grew up. Many
mm,
of my aunts and uncles don't live where they grew up. So it was maybe already ingrained in me and my family that it's okay to do a geographical. It's okay to like pick up and leave and go somewhere that where your home isn't located.
yeah.
And so part of that, I guess, maybe was modeled for me too.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So you talk a lot about in your book of going on our inner journeys, right? Like sort of really trying to go and understand ourselves. And that's such a powerful idea. My podcast is called The Hero's Mindset, and a big part of heroes, right, in hero stories is that they must go outside of their home. They must leave their home,
Hmm.
to really understand themselves. They must go into a forest, or they must go, to New York City, or just something like that, to
Yeah.
really understand themselves. And do you find that when you were in DC, you really got to, understand things about yourself that you had no idea were there?
I think there was some of that, but I think where the reason why the hero's journey follows that formula is because you learn not just about yourself, but in traveling and seeing new places, you learn more about how other people do things and different
Mm,
cultures and different ways of life that I think influence how you see yourself or how you see what is possible. And so I definitely had that experience in my early days when I first got to DC, and you know having to have not knowing anyone, having to make friends and find new things that I was interested in, hobby wise, and spend time on my job and the career kind of space and learning a lot of new things there too.
yeah, no, I think
I,
it is really interesting, just going through and being able to kind of learn like more about, yeah, like the cultures, and especially the culture in Washington D.C. Did you
Mhm.
find that when you were going through there, it was moving you on a path? So I know right now you are not, I'm not going to say, yeah, you are not in, legislation or anything like that. Did you find that moving to DC was allowing you to move closer to your dreams, or where you are now?
No, actually.
Hmm.
My move to DC was very reactionary. It was, my boss basically said, "Hey, we're going to do a reorg, and most of us are going to be spending a lot more time in DC." And that was basically all he said. And I sort of followed him out of the office and said, "I'm going to raise my hand. I'll do it." And for me, I think it was about the adventure, and it was about being able to do something new. It had nothing to do with where I ultimately wanted to be, which was doing personal finance one-on-one with people, which is
Yeah.
where I am now and have been for the last 5 years. However, I was able to parlay that experience eventually, like the different
Mhm.
career hops that I made, into kind of a more financial role, which led me, to where I am today. So, um, I think what happens with most people's careers is it ends up being a little bit of like a splatter paint job on the wall that, yes, you can design it to some degree, but a lot of times your experiences will actually influence where you end up. And so
Yeah.
you'll make little changes along the way, and you'll kind of, do a few lateral moves and a little few, moves up on the ladder itself. And it just kind of ends up being more of an art project than it is like
Hmm.
a linear path.
Well, it's interesting because you are one of the few people, in our generation today. I'm a college student, and most of the people listening are college students. And what I find is that a lot of the college students that I know don't really get started until they're told to get started, right? Like graduating college, getting your first job, kind of at like 22 and things like that. You started at, first of all, your parents own a company. So you were starting working, when you're 8 years old. And then also you got started working once you were like 18 years old and, like
Hmm.
started to experience your own things. Do you recommend that people do that? And do you find that it was actually beneficial for you to actually get started early?
I actually do. I think it's very beneficial. I know today there's a lot of pressure on kids to take part in extracurricular activities and
Yeah.
try to do an internship and try to do X, Y, and Z. And it becomes about volume versus quality. And I think in my case, I had the benefit of having that quality and not necessarily the
Mm,
volume of jobs per se, of like spending a lot of time in one place and learning the ins and outs versus having like a rush job of 3 months at an internship,
yeah.
where you end up doing kind of so-called grunt work,
Yeah.
for people. And it's not to say those opportunities are not valuable, because they really can be, and you can make anything out of any opportunity that you have. But I actually really do advocate for people having real world experience while they're in college, because it helps inform what you want to major in. And if you already know what you want to major in, what you want to study or research or write about while you're in college, and what you want to dive in further. And not just that, but there is a whole ocean of difference between what I'll say the real world and real world work versus
Mm,
academic work. And
yeah.
so to kind of have the opportunity to experience those all at once is helpful. However, there's a flip side to all this. And it's, the flip side is I didn't have a traditional college sort of experience, like I never went on spring breaks. I
Mm,
never had summer vacations. And I was a bit more of a goody two shoes, and sort of, my nose was always in a book, and I was always trying to get through, the college aspect versus savor it and experience it, that,
yeah.
that people can have. Yeah.
Well, it seems like me and you are kind of one and the same because I have a very similar experience. I'm 19 years old. I'm a sophomore in college. And yeah, I don't party. I don't go out and do like all the crazy stuff. I very much limit that. And another thing is that I find that I spend too much time. You described it actually in your book as the addiction to busyness. And I noticed that
Mm.
sometimes I get caught in that, like I'll put in like the 13, 15-hour days where most people will say like, you're stupid. Why are you working so much? And I'll say, yes, it is stupid. Why am I working so much? But at the same time, I have this sort of need to, I feel like if I'm not doing something, then I am useless. I feel like I'm not contributing any value to society, to
Mm.
myself, to really anything. And I'd like to know, like you have sort of made it out on the other side of this. So I'd love to know, like, your experience with that and how you've been able to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a journey. It's still a journey, to be honest. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur for 5 years, and I'm the only one who can give myself permission, right, to give myself a break. And I think one of the strategies or techniques that I use to make sure that that happens is it's something I measure. I actually measure the number of days I take off. I measure,
Really?
even in a week, how many meetings that I want to boost up into my calendar, and I want to make sure that I have adequate time set aside, not just for like structured thinking time, but unstructured non-thinking time too. I mean, taking a walk is valuable use of my time.
Yeah.
And if you asked me when I was 19, I would not have said that taking a walk was a valuable use of my time necessarily. I would have, like you said, I need to be doing something productive and achievement focused and working towards something, because otherwise I'm not worth it.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to discover that that's really the hole that I was trying to fill, was this worthiness piece and the self-esteem piece. Um,
Yeah.
and then so a lot of my journey is about that exactly, and it's what I share in my book is, there's a whole array of inner work that we all have to do to figure out, where does that come from, and what does it mean for me if I let it go, and is there a way for me to do enough and be okay. And I think part of that for me is even just saying that, like, today I am enough. and believing it instead of it just being sort of lip service, you know?
Yeah, well, that's something that I learned about, I would say, about a month ago, 2 months ago. I realized that, the downtime that we have, like these, for example, walking, right? Like I started taking walks every day, like a month or two ago, and you notice that something like that, like being able to unwind your brain and really trying to understand the things that that go on, and trying to understand your own, yeah, we'll say your own brain, like trying to do that is so valuable, right? Like it might not be contributing value to, a company or to the world or anything like that, but you're understanding yourself, and that contributes value to yourself. There was one thing that you put in the book that I really liked. It was the idea of the mask, right? Where if the plane's going down, you put on the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then you go and focus on others. And you say that we should apply that also to mental health, and how
Mhm.
we should focus on ourselves first.
Mhm.
I'd love to hear what you have on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think mental health in general is something that anyone and everyone can do, could do a lot more learning on. And it is my hope, honestly, that the newer generation of like children growing up now do have much more exposure to, even from a young age, learning what emotions they're feeling when they're feeling it. You think of like a toddler having a tantrum, right? And the reason why the tantrum is taking place is because they don't fully understand what they're upset about. They're just upset,
Yeah,
And I think we go through life sort of having those experiences where we have no effing clue why we're upset or what's going on. We're just acting um, in response to things.
yeah,
It's a very reactionary, our emotions tend to be very reactionary. And for those of us if you haven't done work, right, if you haven't done some of this inner work, you may be far less inclined to even be able to identify that you're feeling angry, or why the anger is there. Is it fear? Do you feel like there's something unjust happening in the world? Do you even know where the anger is coming from, right? Do you even know that you're actually angry? Because many of us are taught that anger is a very bad thing, and so we'll push it down and not even allow ourselves to feel it, even though it's justified. And so, I think part of that, putting the oxygen mask on yourself, is getting comfortable with emotions and being able to, in the moment, figure out, what am I feeling and where is this feeling coming from? And then to be able to communicate that with other people, in relationships, in your job. And it's not to say everyone needs to have kumbaya moments or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is to have an awareness is very powerful.
yeah,
And I think when we're dealing with some of those fuzzy issues of needing to push ourselves into work ourselves into oblivion to feel like we're worth something, it's worth digging into some of the emotions wrapped up in that, so that you
yeah.
can maybe just give it a little less power by speaking truth to it.
Yeah, there's so your book, right? It is called The Resiliency Effect, and it's all about, resiliency, which we could define as being able to grow. You define it as being able to overcome obstacles in a somewhat quick fashion, right? Trying to overcome the things that you experience in your life and really growing from them. And you say, right? So, you said that 64% of people have gone through some sort of adverse childhood experience where they really, there's some really traumatic experience that happens in them. And then what you said, which I think was one of the most powerful things, is this idea of introspection and understanding yourself, and really, like, getting into the depths of your thoughts, like different from the toddler who just doesn't understand why he's mad. He's just mad, right? You say that this is one of the most important things. So why do you think that, on the topic of resiliency, why do you think that introspection and understanding yourself is so important?
I mean, that's how we learn, right? I mean, introspection is how we learn from experiences that we've had and make the choice to um, to grow in a way that's beneficial to us and other people around us. Resiliency in and of itself is actually a double-edged sword. We can take coping mechanisms that we developed as a result of traumas or experiences or
Explain.
adverse experiences that we had. And a coping mechanism could actually harm us. The very thing that makes us resilient, like, for instance, for me, growing up in the household that I did, it was always about, yes, I can do it. If I can't do it, I'll figure out how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it by myself, damn it. That kind of experience or that mindset is makes me resilient. It makes me absolutely resilient, because it doesn't really matter what happens to me. I'm going to figure a way out of it or a way to cope with it. Right. But where that double-edged sword comes in is, if I'm always doing things alone and I'm never seeking input from anyone, my world is going to be very myopic, and my view of the world is going to be very small. And also my ability to connect with others is going to be very small if I never include anyone in my thought process or ask for help, or have collective decision making. Right. And
Got it.
so there is a double-edged sword there that we all have to be aware of. And I think that self-reflection is what gives us that information of how we gone a little too far. The pendulum has it swung a little too far in one direction.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the most important things that you talked about, that I started to understand a little bit about myself in there. It's like, whenever you experience any sort of traumatic event, right? Anything, like a sudden event, right? Something that will give you like a mild form of PTSD, or at the same time, just something that was building up over time, maybe like a breach of trust or something like that, your body and your brain naturally develop some sort of coping mechanism, no matter what it is. So, for example, we'll take a lighthearted example. I was working in a team a while ago. I think it was in high school, and I vividly remember when the team really let me down. Like, they really, we were working on a school project, and I ended up having to do all the work. Just a simple experience that you think would have very little effect. But then I realized, for the next X amount of years, I would say 3 or 4 years, I dedicated a lot of time in group projects to being like, all right, guys, don't worry. You guys could just sit in the back burner. I got it. Don't worry. Like, I'll take care of it. And like, I really like learned that I can't trust people. I can't, bring in all of the other people's work, because I don't trust that they're going to get it done in time, and I don't trust they're going to do it properly. And that was a coping mechanism that I naturally learned, and it took me a while to really understand exactly, okay, here's my coping mechanism, here's what I did to overcorrect it, and here's what I need to do to bring it back. And yeah, I think people live their entire lives. That's the problem. People live their entire lives not understanding these coping mechanisms, and it causes a lot of problems.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, imagine you can take that to the extreme, right? And like a partner relationship, and, oh no, honey, don't worry, I'll do all of this. Imagine the resentment that will build up over time for you and the people that you work with in your job, or in for school, or with your relationships in the future, right? I mean, that's one thing that I always have to guard against is, do I start building up resentments the more of this individualistic kind of attitude that I have, or I'll take it on, no problem. I'm efficient.
Yeah.
I can handle it. I can do this and that. And that's a real barb that comes from this, is resentment.
Yeah.
And it can turn you very bitter very quickly. You can feel like nobody else is worth it, or it's a sad state to be in. And I speak from experience, like having developed resentments in my life where it was really my own doing. It had nothing to do with the other person.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. It's like, actually, there was a study that came out. It was a sociology study where they talked about marriage partners, right? If you are in a marriage relationship and one person puts in like 80% of the work and the other puts in 20, no matter what, if there is an imbalance, then actually the other partner almost automatically starts to feel some sort of resentment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it needs to be this sort of like, like running on the same level. And what happens if you don't do that is, imagine if someone's putting in 80% of the work and the other person's putting in 20, there's this innate sense of fairness that we have that
Mm-hmm.
makes us sit there and say, wait a second, this isn't fair. Why am I putting 80% when you're only putting in 20% of the work? And this is true it's got to be true in relationships, in jobs, in friendships, right? Like all of these
Mm-hmm.
things, if someone's putting in more of the work, then you're going to develop this sense of resentment. And you're right. I think that's one of the scariest things. It's part of our own doing.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah. Well, another thing that you talked about in being able to get over resiliency or being resilient is unlearning the old patterns that we had. You know, one of the most important, I guess, we'll say stories that I've ever heard was through this guy. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and he's a philosopher. And he said that when we grow up, our journey goes from a camel to a lion to a child. And that is the
Mm-hmm.
story of humanity or a good human. And what happens is when we are younger, we are camels. And as camels, we actually, we get on our knees and we say, put a load on me, right? Give me this, give me, knowledge, give me rules. I'm going to obey to you. Like all these things happen. And then eventually as that camel, we establish like the rules of society, and the rules of how we should live. And then eventually we become a lion. We walk into the woods as the camel and we turn into a lion. And our job is to fight a dragon. And the dragon is covered in gold. And on each of his scales along his body, it says, "Thou shall, thou shall, thou shall." And
Mm-hmm.
and the whole idea is this dragon is the rules that you've established, but you need to fight them because some of these rules that you've established within yourself, within society, the rules that you've been taught, all these things are somewhat tyrannical, right? They actually have a negative effect on your life. So that is the process of unlearning, and I do want to know, what you found is your process of unlearning, and also how does that contribute to resiliency?
Yeah. I think the first part of the process is just understanding that that's the state you're in, is unlearning. Because I think for most of us, we grow up just absorbing information and knowledge. School teaches us that we're supposed to learn stuff. We don't know it, so we have to learn it, and we have to
Yeah.
keep learning. And many of us get stuck in this loop too, where we feel like we have to continue to pursue educational pursuits so that we can be worth it, that we can prove that that we're good enough. And
Mm.
so in my work as a financial advisor, I see that often, where people who are already highly educated are saying, oh, I've got to go back to school because I've got to do this or that. And I've got to prove to myself. And it's like, the information is within you, right? And so at some point, you're right, we do have to get to a point where we have to decide, okay, is it about a lifelong learning situation, or are there things that we need to let go of and unlearn? And for me, the big thing I had to unlearn that could get me aligned with my ultimate purpose was that having a business is a risky and basically will burn you and burn you out completely. My parents, of course, were small business owners. They own motel properties, and I helped out as a young child. And I saw firsthand how stressful it was for them to own a business and for them to
Yeah.
manage it in the context, not just their own relationship, but in the context of being parents and being people. And so I always said to myself when people would ask me, oh, I never want to start a business. And here's why. It was always too stressful for my parents. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And then I found myself getting my MBA, as one of those things of like a checkbox of like, well, I'm kind of bored now. Maybe I should just go back to school and learn more. But actually what I discovered through my MBA coursework is, you have more agency than you think when you are in business for yourself. And you have the keys to the kingdom in that you can design not only your schedule, but you can design who you want to work with and how you want to work with those people and the significance of what any of that means for you as a business owner, right? And so I just really took that to heart. And I realized, I don't have to do things the way my parents did them. I don't have to set myself up to be on the hustle constantly and trying to, jump through more and more hoops and burn myself out more and more. In fact,
Yeah.
being a business owner could be a way to get me out of that feedback loop that I consistently found myself in the corporate world. And so that was a huge unlearning process of me unlearning a lot of those experiences that had been in my family, for
Yeah.
generations likely.
So what made you able to, one of the things that most people struggle with, and I go to a business school, and in the business school, people love to go into corporate, right? They really want to go into a corporate and then
Mhm.
get a job and then maybe start a company in the future. That's usually the narrative that I hear. And the big problem that they have, and it's a fear, right? It's the fear of risk, right? The fear of failure.
Mhm.
And if I want to start up my own company, I fear that maybe I'll fail, right? And that's one of the problem things that I had to unlearn when I was going to be an entrepreneur and all these things. And I want to know, did you ever have that fear of failure, that fear of risk? And if you did, then what did you do to unlearn it?
Yeah, I mean, I would characterize my entirety of my 20s and much of my 30s to be I wouldn't try anything unless I had almost 100% guarantee that I would be successful. And
Mm,
so I kept myself very safe by having consistent wins in my back pocket, but it was never very risky at all. And so the idea of starting a business, it was huge for me to unlearn the idea of taking a risk. And it was hard too, because you have people around you when you become a business owner asking you questions like, and they come with their own baggage too, of whether their parents were business owners or whatever. And they say things to you like, are you sure you want to do this? You're leaving
yeah.
your job for what? And what is happening? And what's the plan? And you're made to feel as if you don't already have all of the answers, you have no business doing this. But really, the whole idea of doing any of this inner journey, any of the inner work is to be okay with failure and risk, because that's how we learn, and that's
Yeah.
how we discover new things. I mean, one of my huge failures was I failed calculus in college. And here I am, a financial advisor, I work in spreadsheets day in and day out, and I help people with their finances, and I failed calculus,
Yeah.
right?
It's very
But it was a
math-y.
huge turning point for me in my career, right? In that I stopped pursuing an economics degree in my undergrad, and I ended up doing the government path, and that turned out to be a tremendously valuable experience for me. Doing that, and had I remained in economics, I think I probably would have hated my life. I mean, no offense to any economists out there, but I think I would have not enjoyed that path at all. Um, and so, you know, things happen. We learn
Yeah.
from our failures, and I think a hallmark of resiliency is being, it's not just avoiding failure, which many of us feel like that's what resiliency is. It's actually being okay with failure and finding ways to learn despite failure.
Yeah, well, you also did something that was really interesting. When you decided to start up your own company, I was actually talking to this woman named Nikki Groom on my podcast, and she said, she goes, I have never in my life taken a step that was too far. Like, I've never taken a huge step that required a lot of risk and a lot of change and brought me too far into the unknown. So, for example, for her case, she was running her own company, and then on the side, she started to create her own blog and create her own business. And then eventually she did like a nice shift once the business made enough money. You took a little step further, right? You decided you had 3 years worth of cash saved up, but at the same time, you decided I am going on a sabbatical from my job. I am done with this job. Maybe I could go back to in the future, but I am going to try to start something new. I'm not going to make any income for, I think it was 9 months, and I'm going to try to get started. So first of all, what was it that like what specific moment really made you decide, you know what, I'm done with this, and I am going to try to start something new for myself.
Yeah, I mean, my job while I was at Bloomberg, I was trying to move into a bit of like a new space and a new department. Having done my MBA, I had a lot of new knowledge and new insights. And part of the issue in a corporate job, in a corporate environment, is that you often cannot control your destiny with those sorts of things. And
Yeah.
you can make all the inroads you want and land on the team that you want, but then you're there and maybe it's not such a good fit after all, or maybe you were trying to sort of fit a square peg in a round hole, and no one's going to really be there to with a parachute to like help you land softly, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that's where I found myself, is that I had done all this work to go in a direction that I thought was the direction I wanted to go professionally. And I got there and it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And it wasn't a good fit for me either. And I was traveling back and forth from New York to DC every other week, and it was exhausting.
Yeah,
I was
sounds like it.
completely burned out, completely. And I finally relented from the burnout, and I said, I have to leave. I'm done. And it was right before I finished my MBA too. I was like turning in my final project, and all at once there was many new endings and new beginnings.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the way my brain works. It's like black and white thinking, right? It's like if it's on, we're on and we're going really hard. And if it's off, we're shutting it all down. And that's sort of
Yeah.
what I did at that moment is, graduated, left the job, decided that it really needed to be a complete shutdown of work for a while so that I could reset myself.
Yeah. And in your book, you actually recommend that people do take sabbatical. You recommend that people take time, if you have enough money, if you have enough finances. Obviously, as a personal finance person, you believe that. If you have enough finances, then just take some time off for yourself. Try to really reorient yourself. Why do you really suggest that? And yeah, how much did it really do for you in terms of creating your own business?
Well, I got used to not achieving. That was the number one goal. Not even a goal, but it was a side effect, maybe unintended, of taking a sabbatical. And that, I would get bored, and I would like look at the cracks in my wooden floor and think, oh my God, I've got to do something about these cracks. And then in the next moment, I would say, wow, this is how bad it's gotten, and that I can't even like be quiet and do nothing for 5 minutes, where I'm literally searching for a to-do list item the
Yeah.
moment I'm quiet and at homeostasis. And so for me, that was a real eye-opener of like, okay, I need to just chill, and I need to learn how to be okay with just being, as opposed to needing to be a human doing. And so that's what my sabbatical taught me, was how to get comfortable with that uncomfortableness. And I think that's what a lot of people need at this point, because burnout is a total epidemic in the
Yeah.
country. And I mean, if you're not dying from it, you're slowly dying from it, because it's going to end up being, leading to chronic diseases of all kinds of things. And
You actually
so,
put it in your book. You said the WHO called it an occupational phenomenon, burnout.
yeah,
And that's actually really scary. One of the things about burnout that really freaks me out is that people just don't have hobbies, right? Like, you
yeah.
spend, right? Like we all have this idea that we need to be working, we need to be constantly going, going, going. The only problem with that is if you spend 80 hours a week going, going, going on the same thing, then you're gonna eventually burn out. So
Mhm.
do you find that in your life you've developed, either well, actually, what route have you taken? Have you developed more hobbies, or at the same time, have you just been able to sit alone in a room with yourself and really not like feel the need to do anything?
A little of both. And I think, my first couple of years, well, during my sabbatical, my intent was not to take on a bunch of hobbies, other than just to have a healthy lifestyle, like getting to workouts and going to see friends and that sort of a thing.
Yeah,
So I went from that extreme of trying to like not fill my life with a lot of things, to now 5 years into having my business, and with a goal being to take 60 days off a year, and to have a year where you're not allowed to travel due to COVID is
yeah,
is frustrating. And so I have taken on a lot of new hobbies this year. Part of it has been an exploration and creativity, just as like to give myself a sandbox of, what are the things that I enjoy and that give me energy, and what are the things that I can create and offer, even if it's just to myself, and not necessarily
yeah,
things to create for the world. But and so I think it shifts and changes, and I think there's a season for all these things. And but what I have learned is that a lot of the hobbies and the time off and all of that influences how I work, right? It gives me an opportunity to think about how I think about things, and think about the knowledge and the wisdom that I have, and can then share those thoughts clearly and concisely with others. If you're working all the time, when I was working constantly, I never had such insights. I never was able to break for a moment to have that reflection and have
yeah,
the key lessons, right? And so I think the time off, I think the hobbies, I think not pigeonholing yourself into like a one single lane. All of it influences how our uniqueness and our, what we bring as a person to the world. And I think it's really important to develop and explore lots of that stuff.
Well, that's the thing. You break the stereotype of every entrepreneur ever, right? You completely break it. You imagine entrepreneur, it's the person who puts in the 80-hour weeks. It's the person who, grinds himself to the bone and really, we could say maybe loves it, right? The entrepreneur who really enjoys like putting in 80-hour weeks, sort of like an Elon Musk type. But you have a goal to do apparently 60 days of days off for an entire year. So how did you come up with that? Like, what was it that gave you the idea of, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, but at the same time, I'm going to take 2 months off a year of not doing any of the entrepreneurial work?
Well, honestly, this is sort of like a tantrum dating back from my corporate experience, right? It's like they give you, you start off when you first get a job, you might get 2 weeks off a year.
Yeah.
Before I left my corporate job, I had 20 days off a year. And even that, I found that it wasn't quite enough. Like there were times when I just wanted a few extra days here and there.
Yeah.
And especially while I was getting my MBA and had to like go to a part-time schedule at work in order to complete my MBA, it's like I needed more time off as a result. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so
of course.
when I designed for myself, what was possible and what I was going to create as norms for myself in my business, I knew that was going to be a hallmark of mine of like time off is important. And so I wanted to at least double what I had at my corporate job, but I found that a 60 days off was nice because it means my husband and I could take like a 3-week or a 4-week vacation and spend time in Asia or spend time in Europe without any issue at all. Without feeling guilty, without feeling like we're missing something, without feeling like, we're leaving something behind.
So
Yeah, I just
mean,
gave myself permission. Yeah.
well, that's the thing, somebody who's looking on the outside in, or from the outside in, would be saying, hey, listen, you're an entrepreneur, right? Like, don't you need to be monitoring your business at all times? And don't you need to, aren't you going to be losing 2 months worth of revenue, profit, all these things? Have you found that it actually has helped your business? Or do you find that, it is just good for your personal life and you really need it to be able to sustain the business properly?
Well, I mean, it's good for my clients because I'm rested and I'm not running ragged and I know exactly everything that's going on in their lives and I can get up to speed very quickly. Most people who are in my industry have 200 plus clients that they're dealing with. And I don't know about you, but I think there's been studies that show that you basically can have about 100 relationships.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
after that, it's not really much of a relationship. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah. You can
so
only take
to
so
have
much.
norms, to have the norms in the wealth management industry of needing to work with 200 people is first of all ridiculous because no one can do that and do it well. And so I intentionally keep my business small in that I only work with about 50, maybe 60 as a cap households. And I do that by design because I want to make sure that I do my best work for the people that I work with. And taking the time off, helps me keep that balance, but also, there's no temptation for me to start creeping in to take on more and more people.
Yeah.
Because it means that everyone else's relationship with me will suffer,
Yeah. Well, do you also find that now that you have only 50 to 60 clients instead of 200, do you find that or do you at least make a good effort to try to develop personal relations with them in your work? Or is there still a level of professionality that's really difficult in like breaking down walls?
No, I mean, I think that's what makes me unique and different in the offering that I have as a financial advisor is, before I offer any advice whatsoever on your finances, I want to learn about you and your values and your goals for your life and not just superficial things like I want a vacation home. I want to do this. I want to do that. It's like, what do you want to accomplish in your life? And so we're going to dive into that and we're going to spend a lot of time on it before I even offer a single advice about your investments or your retirement plan, because if we don't have that information, we're going to be very inaccurate in the advice that we give. And so part of my process is getting to know the client really well on a deeply personal level.
Well, that's the struggle that I think is probably the biggest problem, right? Is when you meet these people as a financial advisor, do you notice or do you find that these people don't really have themselves figured out and they don't really know what they want?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's a lot of the times the case. Most of them know something about what they want because that's what calls them to call on a financial advisor, right? There's a
Yeah,
problem they're trying to solve. There's a challenge they're experiencing, and so there's something they want to accomplish. And most of them can name big goals that they have for themselves, but very few of them are actually living many of those goals. And so a
really.
lot of my work is to try to figure out, okay, what is something you can do to work on this now? Or if you can't do this now, what is the feeling that you get when you think about making this big move and, going off and making this big career change? And is there a
Yeah.
way to get some of that feeling in your life now? If so, how? And what would you do to get there?
Yeah, I
And
do.
my role, I see my role as a facilitator. I don't have all the answers and I don't presume to know all the answers for all these people, but I want to help them figure out what that is and help them unlock that for themselves. And so I just
Interesting.
hold space. I hold the space for them to do some of that work.
Well, it seems like you're doing some semi-psychologist work because it really sounds like you're trying to help them understand what they want. And it also sounds like maybe they don't even know what they want. Maybe they come to you saying, I want to change my careers, but they don't really know the answer of why do I want to change my careers? Where do I want to go to? And all these things. So do you find that your job as a facilitator is really trying to help them understand themselves a little bit more?
uh, Understand themselves, understand experiences. Certainly,
Hmm.
I view my work as more of like in the coaching profession than in the psychology profession. Though, I mean,
Hmm.
I myself have done a lot of therapy. I'm not a therapist. I
Yeah.
really just hold space for people and, let them try to uncover what already exists in their brain, but bring it out into the open, basically.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it is really interesting. There's one topic that I did want to hit on in terms of financial advising, and this is something that I find is a huge misconception about retirement. But at the same time, I am 19 years old, and maybe my ignorance is really getting to me. So I must ask the question. Um, I'll preface it with this. There's this man. His name's Dean Kazanis. He's a runner. He spends all of his life running marathons and ultra marathons and all these things. And he says that he is happiest when he is running. He is not happiest when he's sitting on the couch. And his idea is that he said he has a great quote. He goes, "Somewhere along the line, we have confused happiness with comfort." And it's a strong belief that when we go on vacations, right, it should be a tropical vacation rather than climbing up a mountain or doing something that's challenging but fun. you know um and then also in retirement, right? So getting back to retirement, it's like some people believe that they should kind of just like retire and move down to Florida and just kind of like live out their days in, some warm tropical place where they could just sort of lay there. My uncle, when I told him that, he said, "You're essentially waiting for the bus." That was the phrase that he used. He said, "You're just waiting for the bus to come take you. There's no meaning in that. There's nothing valuable in that." And he says that he wants to do something in his life that's a little bit more struggle filled, like challenging, meaningful, struggling things where you could keep growing and keep pursuing instead of sort of slowly deteriorating. Do you find that so obviously I favor the latter, but do you find that in financial advising for people who are trying to plan their retirements that they spend a lot of their time trying to plan for comfort, or do you find that they spend a lot of time planning for the meaningful, challenging, struggling things that come with not waiting for the bus, you could say?
I mean, it really depends on the person. And a lot of my goal in working with people who are nearing retirement or planning out of retirement is to get them to think about, what it is they're leaving behind and what it is they're retiring to, and to get them to conceive of what this will look like and what their day-to-day life will look like. I agree with you. I don't necessarily think it needs to be a struggle, but I think there needs to be some, purpose to, our reason to continue living. And people who don't develop that, or, just think about only leaving the job that they've been doing for however many decades behind, are going to be sorely disappointed, because they're going to get into retirement and it's going to be a total change of, we don't have things to tell us we're good. We don't have anybody to pat us on the back anymore and tell us we're
Yeah.
good and we're interesting. And thank you so much for your hard work. And so what I find in practice is that a lot of people who, in retirement, they end up taking on projects that allow them to pursue either something that is adjacent to what they did in their career, and maybe they're mentoring people, or they're using like skills that they have to do something public policy related, or something interesting like that. Or some people just develop a hobby, or they explore a hobby they've always had and spend a lot more time doing it. And those are the people who are happiest in retirement, that they have, things that they're doing, projects that they're working on, whether it's, like I said, like a more formalized something or more like a hobby. So yeah, we spend time thinking about that. I'm not going to let someone retire who just wants to leave their job. That's maybe where they're at when they first come to me. But by the time that they actually do make the decision to retire, we're going to have a lot more understanding of what it is they want to actually spend time doing in retirement.
Oh, so you're saying that you won't let them retire if they don't know what they're going to do afterwards?
I mean, that's a bit of an extreme statement. Yeah. But yes, we need to know what we're retiring to before we make the decision to retire. Because if we are just doing it simply to leave the job, we're going to be very disappointed. But also my numbers and my projections are going to be totally off as well, because if you don't know what you're going to be spending your time doing, it's hard to imagine what we're actually going to be spending money on too.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that was one thing that you put in the book that actually was shocking to me. Actually, you said that you called it, or actually somebody else called it, a quote, invisible epidemic. And the invisible epidemic is adults, right? Like 60, like people who have retired suddenly developing drug and alcohol addictions because, you retire and then you suddenly realize, what next? What do I do now? Right? I have nothing meaningful to really sustain me. And then, and he said 11% of 11% of hospitalizations related to people who are, I think it was over 65, are related to drugs and alcohol, which is something that is really slightly concerning. And it makes me sort of believe that, that meaning, right? Like, even though you're retired, you still need something meaningful to pursue.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could just be spending time with your grandkids or spending time with your loved ones, right? That is a pursuit that's worthwhile. But we need to examine that of like who we're going to be spending time with and what we enjoy. What we enjoy doing. And if it involves, being around more people or less people. I mean, it's all personality dependent, but you do have to explore those things before you make a definitive decision about your retirement.
Makes sense. Well, there's one question I do want to ask you. So, and this is something that I found was really powerful. There was this concept, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it right, but it's a Japanese word. I think it was called Ikigai, right?
Ikigai.
Ikigai. Yeah, there was no way I was getting that. Thank you. And the translation, the rough translation to Ikigai is your purpose in life, right? The purpose of you being on this earth. And you said that it constantly changes, but at the same time, it is great to know what your purpose in life is at all times. So I must ask you, Cady North, what is your Ikigai?
So my Ikigai is working with people to help them explore their life and their finances and making sure their values dovetail with that. It's why I started my company instead of going to work for another financial planning company, that I'm able to serve, women who are in their 30s and 40s versus the vast majority of this industry, which only serves people who have $1 million or more saved already for retirement or for, have wealth to begin with. So, there's it's a big mission, right? It's a big mission to work with people who aren't typically served by the wealth management industry.
Interesting. Oh, so your business. So I know in your book you interviewed about, you said 50 people, and a lot of them were entrepreneurial women, correct?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
is that your client base? Is your client base specifically, entrepreneurial women or women who are not traditionally served in the finance industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely women who probably are currently in the corporate world, but they're trying to figure out what their next steps are and their next move to try to become self-employed. And so, one of my big goals is to demystify, entrepreneurship is this difficult, tough hustle, and show people a path of how it doesn't have to be that way, and it can be actually a way to get a lot more power and purpose back into your life.
Yeah, well, I find so I'll throw in a little fun topic. So I was watching Mary Poppins the other day, and one of the characters, one of the main characters, a very spiritual guy, and he says he had a great quote. He was talking about the children's father, Mr. Banks, who worked for a bank, and just
Mhm.
put those connections right there. Wow, I did not think of that one, but he said that Mr. Banks, this banker who is, not very spiritual, but at the same time only cares about money, very greedy, all these things. He is stuck in a cage. He is stuck in not a physical cage, but he actually called it a bank-shaped cage because some
Mm.
people, their minds are restricted to these things such as money, such as fame, such as pleasure, such as, all these things that really that or corporatism, right? Like being an employee, this restricts our freedom to do all the things that we really want to do. So, do you find that entrepreneurship or the fear of entrepreneurship is something kind of like that? People living in a cage and they feel very restricted by being an employee, not taking the risk, and yeah, they feel like they're sort of in a cage.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people who come to see me initially for me to be their financial advisor, their one of their goals is to leave their corporate job, and most
Really.
of them won't define it on a time scale. They'll say one day, I want to
Mm,
do that one day, and I don't even know what I'd actually do, but I want to do something that's not, working for the man anymore. And
yeah.
so it is a very common dream that people have. And I think it is a lot about because you get put in a box and you have a lot less freedom, and you're actually asked to be like dehumanize yourself a lot of the time. I mean, there's all sorts of literature and books written about in the knowledge economy, right? How we need creativity and we need creative outlets in order to do our job well. But
Mm,
the corporate environment is all about making the widget and growing every year, growing quarter over quarter, selling more things, being less and less human,
yeah.
and they're at odds with one another. They're at odds with us as we are humans, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like the corporate life today still does put you in a box and isn't very human at all. And you get to a point after you've done it for a while and you've maybe checked some boxes and feel good about where you're at, making a good living. And you realize, well, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And so it's just a common journey that I see a lot of people on. And, I feel for them because I experienced it too.
Yeah. Well, you said in your book, and this I literally, like, I sent this to a few of my friends because I was like, this is something that really, I get on my friends all the time about, and it kills me. I'll say right here. Everyone says they'll achieve their dreams, quote, one day, but most don't. And that's the thing. You said every single person that you meet has the plan, like they'll say like, "Oh yes, I will achieve my dreams one day." But the problem is that everybody says they're going to achieve their dreams someday. It's like, how could you distinguish between the people who achieve them and the people who don't? And what do you believe is the way that people could go and achieve their dreams without just leaving it in that one day ether?
Well, I think you have to work against your own status quo bias, right? We all want to stay safe, and we all want to find the easiest, direct way to make decisions. And a lot of times that means not making a decision to change and staying with
Mm,
the status quo. And so we all have that, and it keeps us safe. It makes things easier, right? But, to take a step back and to do some self-reflection and to say, okay, well, what would it be like if I let go of my status quo bias and I didn't just do what everybody expected of me or what people are asking of me? And to give yourself that permission and to do that self-reflection is so powerful. And it's the first step in actually achieving your big dreams.
and
And
that
so,
gets
I mean, if you take anything away from the book, I mean, that's it. It's self-reflection is extremely powerful.
Yeah, and also, I mean, what you just described right there, that is the process of unlearning, right? Like,
Yeah.
like when you say you're going to achieve your dreams someday, if you say someday and you don't say right now, that means that there's something in your some status quo, some mindset barrier that is in the way of you achieving it, and you need to unlearn that one thing, whatever it is, to really go and achieve it. My advice to anybody doing it, and I don't know if you'd give the same advice as somebody who's seen like the entire career trajectory of a lot of people. My advice is start now, right? My advice is start now in whatever you can do, because for the people who say, I'm going to go through the crappy corporate job for 10 years and then I'll do it at the end of my 10-year period. My whole thing is your soul might die along the way.
Mhm.
You might lose that passion, or you might establish more mental barriers as you continue to go through. So my advice is start now. I would love to know if you have the same advice or if it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know, it's a little bit more complicated or layered because through all of our life experiences, whether or not they were quote unquote good or bad, we learn, right? And so
Yeah.
there's always an opportunity to change and shift and pivot in our lives, right? It's
Mm,
never oh, I didn't do this, so now I never can. It's never I went down this path, so now I got to keep going down this path. I think, a really important permission that we all need to give ourselves is the permission to change our minds and to change
mm,
our paths. And so if you let yourself have that permission, then it doesn't matter if you pursue the corporate job for 10 years and then decide to change your mind, right? Because you're going to learn from that experience. Just the same way, it doesn't matter if you start off from scratch and you say, I'm going to follow my dreams every step of the way. You may stumble in either direction, right? But
yeah.
you're going to learn things from both experiences, and it will mold you into whatever you end up becoming.
Interesting. So you're saying that uh, sort of I think this is the biggest problem, dropping the ego a little bit, dropping our we all have an ego, and trying to be able to drop, that idea that moving out of the place that I am right now. Let's use money for example. Moving out of the $100,000 job and moving down into the place of financial uncertainty. That we need to drop our ego first before we even get to anywhere near that.
Yeah, I mean, I think ego can be a stumbling block, certainly.
Yeah,
But a lot of self-reflection is a good antidote for that.
yeah.
Is to figure out, where are these feelings coming from? What is the true motivation behind some of this? Yeah.
And you talked a lot about that. And I think that was one of the most important things in your book, The Resiliency Effect. And I read it through and through, and I highly suggest that people buy it. I just want you to give, for anyone who listened through this whole podcast, a little pitch as to why somebody should buy The Resiliency Effect, which will be in the description below this podcast or this YouTube video.
Yeah. So, I mean, the book is a way to unlock what your dreams are, but unlock the sort of tools and systems for achieving them. And it's going to be different than what you think. It's not about taskless, doing more in a day, getting another rung on your career ladder. It's about doing deep inner work and
Yeah.
discovering for yourself what is truly going to um, make your life worthwhile.
Mm, I love that. I love that. Cady North, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Nick.